Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel Tour update. And as we're set to deliberate the latest developments here in Israel, throughout the region and beyond, it's always important to remember how this war began. 340 days ago, on October 7th of last year, the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates in the Gaza Strip launched an onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping 246 people, including elderly, men, women, children, and infants. 101 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. The subsequent day, on October 8th of last year, Iran practically joined the war by greenlighting its proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, to launch cross-border attacks against Israel. Since then, Hezbollah has launched thousands of rockets towards Israel, and not only Hezbollah, but additional Iranian proxies, including from Syria, from Iraq, from Yemen, including from Iran proper, on the night between the 13th and 14th of April of this year, when it launched over 300 projectiles from Iranian territory towards Israel. Now, the latest developments, Mr. Amir Oren, TV7's editor-at-large. What can you tell us about them, particularly now when there's a certain skepticism in the air about prospects for a diplomatic solution to see hostages returning back home in exchange for a temporary ceasefire?
So there are three developments, or rather developments on all three active fronts in which Israel is now engaged. In Gaza, the Israeli Air Force has attacked a concentration of Hamas terrorist leaders and killed several of them. The Palestinians claim that because they were in a humanitarian zone in the Muwasi, the westernmost tract of mostly sand bordering the Mediterranean, dozens of civilians were also killed, buried under the rubble. This is still under investigation, but the IDF has already published the names of the specific terrorists who took part not only in the massacre on October the 7th, but in attacks against Israeli civilians and IDF troops ever since. On the West Bank, the initial investigation, the initial inquiry following the accidental killing of a Turkish-American volunteer turned out to have been indeed that. According to the IDF, it was an indirect, accidental shot aimed at what the IDF termed the chief instigator of riots against the Israeli soldiers who came under mortal danger, fired at the rioters, and unintentionally killed this person. Secretary of State Antony Blinken did not accept the inquiry's results, and he was in London today and responded that the IDF should revisit its rules of engagement and should improve its conduct in the West Bank.
I wonder what rules of engagement would he dictate to the IDF in those circumstances?
Well, maybe he knows, following other incidents by settlers, by violent settlers, when the IDF held its fire, even when the settlers posed mortal danger either to Palestinian civilians or even to the security forces. So obviously, there is no symmetry, but apparently, because the Biden administration is under pressure from its own critics, this is what Blinken said. Another attack which the IDF successfully conducted was in Lebanon. It took out Eradwan, that is the commando force that Hezbollah has, Eradwan leader. And Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant, when visiting the troops, once again declared that the center of gravity of IDF operations is being transferred from Gaza to Lebanon. What does that mean for the troops still stationed in Gaza, especially if, as you said in your introduction, the hostage deal does not seem to have very bright prospects, remains to be seen.
Indeed, there are reports, of course, about discussions about a Plan B being humored by the current administration in Washington, trying to revisit a diplomatic solution detached from one in Gaza for the country of Lebanon, of course, with the hopes of having UN Security Council Resolution 1701 implemented without the use of force. Unfortunately, I don't see that occurring. With regard to your initial remark,
It's a definite maybe.
it's a definite maybe, that's for sure. With regard to your initial remark about, of course, the Islamist Hamas claiming that dozens of civilians were killed, Hamas continues to claim that 41,000 civilians are dead. It doesn't differentiate between civilians and its own terror operatives. And unfortunately, there are countries around the world, of course, those enemies and adversaries that have an interest in pushing this number forward for their own political interests. But of course, there are also elements in the West, unfortunately, that are plagued by disinformation. But let's now turn to the country of Spain, where we're joined from Madrid by Dr. Rafael Barraji, formerly Spain's national security advisor and CEO of Worldwide Strategy. It's good to see you, Rafael.
My pleasure.
I'd like to. The pleasure is all ours. I'd like to shift gears to Egypt, where we're seeing the Arab League join together in Cairo. They're hosting, among others, also the European Union's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, namely Josep Borrell, during the course of which he said time and again that he doesn't know why the negotiations are failing, and he doesn't know who is responsible for the failure, despite the Americans noting that Hamas is the obstacle to talks. What are we to make out of this coming out of the spokesman, pretty much, of the European institution?
The Spanish spokesman.
Yeah, Spanish. The good thing is that he is the outgoing spokesman. Okay,
Right.
so I think getting rid of Borrell in the European Union, whoever it comes after him, cannot be worse. So I wouldn't expect something else from him, which had always aligned himself with any enemy that Israel has had in the past, has in the present. So I'm not surprised, unfortunately, I have to say. Josep Borrell reminds me one of those very left extreme leaders that we have. We are suffering in Spain nowadays. And he always had been very anti-Israeli, if not anti-Semite properly. So anything that he may say is just for his own gallery and audience, disregarding the potential implications. He's not stupid. He does anything with a purpose and an agenda. And the agenda has been always in favor of Iran, always in favor of the enemies of Israel. And that's something that we have to remind every people in the audience.
Indeed. Let's follow up on that point. Abbas Araghchi, the recently appointed foreign minister of Iran, just met with Josep Borrell, during the course of which they had various discussions. Those discussions were shared, at least part of them, with IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi, who also highlighted continued efforts to try and find a certain breakthrough into a potential process to negotiations, and the whole mantra coming all over again. The fact of the matter is, he is raising the alarm about Iran's defiance of international regulations and continued enrichment of uranium beyond the limits within the NPT, not just the JCPOA, also highlighting the installations of additional cascades. What can we learn from all of that? Is Iran on the brink of turning to a point of no return?
Well, according to the latest report last month from the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, Iran has made a lot of progress in the capacity to enrich uranium to weapons grade. According to what they say, they have the capacity to produce enough fissile material, military grade, for a weapon in a month for 9 warheads. So that's very scary. That's the point where Iran really can decide whether or not move forward on the weaponization, and we will be facing a very short time span to respond. No? So I just quoting the report from the International Atomic Energy, Iran has now the ability, if they want to, of producing 9 nuclear warheads in less than a month. So it's scary enough.
Very scary indeed. Of course, the head or chairman of the House Intelligence Committee in the United States has warned roughly 3 weeks ago that before year's end, Iran may indeed announce that it is a nuclear weapon state. But on that matter, I'd like to ask our next guest, Israeli commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense, namely Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish. It's always a pleasure. I'd like to ask you on the latest threat by the RGC commander Hassan Salami, who came out and pledged that an attack against Israel is not a matter of if, but rather of when, and that Iran is determined to exact a heavy toll from Israel, which of course we are preparing for all kind of various scenarios. But in the event that the Iranians suddenly announce that they are going to break out to a nuclear weapon state or status, so to speak, would the defense of Israel be brought into question, and would it garner Israel or force Israel to go on the offensive?
Well, Jonathan, I think that we don't have to wait for him to say it, because we see Iran on the attack. You said it rightly on the beginning of this update that Iran gave the green light to Hezbollah and all his proxies. Iran shot toward Israel 300 projectiles on the 13th and 14th of April this year. So we don't need him to tell us that we are at war, because we are in a war with Iran. And by the way, not only Israel, we have to remember what Iran is doing with the Houthis, of course, in the applications of it on the international shipyards, and not shipyards, the shipment of goods worldwide. And Iran is in a war. Iran is, and this is something that was just mentioned by Blinken, Iran is supporting Russia with missiles, with UAVs, and Russia is, by the way, supporting, we just heard, Iran with their nuclear knowledge. So we are there. Iran is basically the destabilizer of this region. We have to say again and again, Iran is not passive anymore like it was years before. You know, we just have to remember that, 20 years ago, something like this, 15 years ago, the Iranian were on 3% on their factories, and today we are talking about 90% and more. Iranian, they have a long-term strategy. They are there, they are going there, and if we, the world, the Western world, won't decide to stop it, it won't stop, and they would get where they want to go. With regards to Israel, of course, that we're talking about the defense of Israel, the defense system, the multi-tier defense showed its capabilities toward the Iran projectiles and the Houthis projectiles and so on. But we have to remember that we cannot rely only on the defense. We have to remember that defense is never hermetic. And when it comes to weapon of mass destruction, you just can't take this chance. So you have to be much more proactive. You have to be able to do not only on the defense, you have to be able to act also in the offense, and sometimes a preemptive attack like the one that we saw in the northern region here in Israel 3 weeks ago. But I hope that we wouldn't get to this point. I hope that someone would wake up. It is not only about the military options, by the way. The world still have, the Western still have other options toward the Iran, economical and others, that he just have to decide that he wants to apply it. And this is probably what should be done.
If Iran breaks out, of course, it will introduce many new types of weaponry into the region, but also beyond that, of course, there are going to be far-reaching ramifications for the entire world and the Non-Proliferation Treaty in particular. But Mr. Oren, one point that we should take out of all of this is the fact that Iran, due to the fact that it has that window of opportunity to break out to nuclear weapon state or threshold state beyond the scope of what is being reported on, it could also mean that it does not have an interest, and that is at least the intelligence community's current presiding assessment. It does not have an interest to have a full-fledged war between Hezbollah and Israel, having this Iranian proxy in Lebanon as a guarantor, so to speak, for the moment in which it does take such a decision. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Iran is pursuing a two-track policy. It tries to revive the nuclear talks or another secret channel with the United States with a view to getting sanctions relief in order for its economy to get better and therefore domestic pressures to be a bit reduced on the regime. At the same time, it is very aggressive in its pursuit of hegemony in the region. Of course, through proxies, better that not one Iranian get killed, especially after the 1980s and the hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of Iranians killed in the war with Iraq. It is very much risk averse as far as its own direct involvement is concerned. Yes, the April offensive was an exception to the rule, but it telegraphed its intentions so much in advance that one wonders whether it was a real attack on its part or a choreographed move in order to save face. And we have to see whether the supposedly relatively moderate new president and his foreign minister have any influence over the IRGC and especially over the supreme leader.
A demon relative to the devil. Dr. Bardahi, I'd like to ask you particularly also on another theater. There's an ongoing and growing discussion about the Horn of Africa, particularly also Somalia and Sudan, with regard to, on the one hand, internal strife within those two countries, but also an increase of influence by the Islamic Republic of Iran, with the Houthis and the Iranians deliberating various courses of action to bolster their presence there via Al-Shabaab and other organizations active in those theaters. What can we learn from the latest developments, and is this an early alarm to something that may evolve into a bigger crisis than what the Houthis are currently implementing in the Red Sea?
Well, I think we have to remind ourselves first that Iranian leaders has never go for the fastest path to get a nuclear bomb and to become hegemonic in the region. They always choose the safest path. So what they are now doing is just trying to play the game again, cheating on the one hand with the nuclear advancement, and then trying to negotiate a window for time to promote their own agenda and their own programs and advance towards the nuclear weapons stockpile and arsenal. On the regional arena, it's the same. They are just extending the tentacles against the Western wall, against the powers which are considered to be enemy of Iran interest in the region and towards Israel at the last. So I think it's a very coherent strategy of putting the hands under the table everywhere they can and trying to get all the hills that they are empty by many other powers, American leaving or Israel distracted or the other countries which are not up to the task nowadays. So it is very inconsistent. It's a strategy of promoting confrontation at the end of the day and to be prepared for any contingency in the better scenario for them as possible.
What's quite also interesting and apparent is that it is not only considering its own interests, but it seems to align its current interests in the transition period as it identifies it within its own grand strategy with those of Russia, with those of China, with those of other anti-Western countries in order to further bolster and grant it that tailwind necessary to break through. Nonetheless, of course, all eyes are towards Washington with regard to the upcoming election in November to see what kind of outcome is coming about and
Yeah.
what implications that has.
I mean, if I may add, just in Kissingerian terms, Iran has always been a revolutionary power. They were never satisfied with the status quo and then tried to change it. They were weak and they were alone. Now they have other powers which are also revolutionary, Russia and China. And probably the time has come for them to do something, not in a formal alliance, but a kind of loose axis against the Western order. No? That's clear to me, at least.
Indeed. General Gavish, we don't have very much time left. Nonetheless, I'd like to ask you about the broad considerations right now of Israel, as Mr. Oren has mentioned, shifting gears from the Gaza Strip towards the north. Are we expected to see a upward trajectory of tit and tat, the way we have been seeing now for almost 1 year, intensify to a certain degree, or is this going to continue more of the same with a certain abruption of a prospective escalation coming out of miscalculation?
Yeah, allow me just one word on the previous discussion. I think that the Europeans have to look and open their eyes, because the Iranians now, it is not a collaboration between Iran and Russia and China. The Iranian directly are part of the attack toward a country in Europe. They are supporting the Russians with missiles. They are supporting the Russians with UAVs, and they meet it in Ukraine. It's there. It is there. And now going back to your question, this is a good question, Jonathan, because we, just as a reminder, we know that Israel said that strategically it is on the offensive in the south part of Israel and defense on the northern part of Israel, what we call an active defense, because we are not only on the defense, we are still acting and toward the Hezbollah, sorry, but it is not a full-scale war. And this is the big question, if Israel is really going to change its strategy. I think that we cannot allow ourselves to continue to be in the north as we are now for a long time. We have to remember 70,000 Israelis are displaced from their home, refugees in their own country. We have to remember that during the last 10 months overall, there were more than 6,000 rockets and other projectiles that were shot toward Israel from the Hezbollah. This is nothing that we could continue with. So there is basically two paths. The one is the diplomatic one, and the other one is the military one. Of course, you want to exhaust as much as you can and to try to see if there is a diplomatic way that the Hezbollah, with by its own, with the go back with his forces to 1701 line and so on. I'm not very optimistic that it would happen. I hope so. But Israel have to, for sure, prepare itself to something different in the northern part of Israel. Because as I said before, I don't think that we could continue like this for more than where we are at now.
Mr. Olin, very briefly, since we're going to deliberate this more tonight at 9:15 Israel time during our Jerusalem studio discussion on prospects for a northern war, there was a quite significant sortie of multiple strikes on the night between Sunday and Monday, which Damascus attributed to the Israeli Air Force. What can you tell us about that? And don't unveil too much, since we do still have much to talk about later.
So, of course, Syria is the other third partner in the Iranian Hezbollah axis. It used to be the senior partner with Hezbollah. Now it's probably the junior one, with the civil war still going on, or the Turks in the north and all of that. Nevertheless, it was a very important strike in order to at least reduce the special capabilities that the Syrians have provided Hezbollah, perhaps in unconventional warfare or precision guidance. So we should look forward to more of the same.
Indeed, they're talking, of course, about Sector 4, which is a quite significant precision munitions upgrade utility for various dumb missiles to try and bolster Hezbollah's capabilities against Israel. One sentence each, what should we focus on for the next 24 hours? Dr. Bardahi, we'll start with you.
Well, I think all the prospect about any future deal with Hamas regarding the hostages. But I have to remind everyone that there are two schools of thought on here. One, those who are approaching the Gaza as dismantling Hamas, and others which are saying destroying Hamas, mitut and peruk in Hebrew words. Those two different things has different implications for political, diplomatic, and operational impact. And this is a dissonance that has to be solved sooner or later. And I know that Israel can open two fronts if they are forced to, but I think the best way to reassure deterrence everywhere will be to destroy Hamas entirely.
Absolutely. General Gavish, half a sentence.
Eyes to the north.
That is half a word, or actually not, but go ahead.
Well, Jonathan, you're asking too
I
much.
think that, this is really the story. I mean, our Minister of Defense, Gallants, said it. We heard it also from Herzi Alevi. This is something that we should look at. And by the way, not to forget what is happening in the West Bank, because this is another front that we are finding ourselves lately.
Absolutely. Well, this is all the time that we have for today. I'm sorry, Mr. Olin.
That's fine.
We'll reserve some extra seconds for you in the next episode.
No, the one thing, you ask us for the next 24 hours. This is September the 10th. Tomorrow is September 11th. You remember what happened 23 years ago. No one could have foreseen on September the 10th what would happen the next day.
Indeed. Well, Dr. Bardahi, General Gavish, thank you so very much. And thank you, Mr. Olin, for that insight as well. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.